Good evening, cherished viewers, and welcome to another edition of World View on GBC 24, the African Story. My name is Bubu Knenogo. Sierra Leone's National Electoral Commission has issued an official statement stressing that data entry is underway and accuracy will take precedence over speed. Meanwhile, a coalition of local and international civil society organizations that has been observing the Sierra Leonean elections has projected an election runoff, saying none of the candidates will secure the 55% constitutional threshold required to be declared outright winner. We will also delve into Kenya, where Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga have pledged to unite Kenyans after chaotic polls. I have been joined in the studios by Kafui Chepo from the Center for Social Democracy, Ghana. Kafui, welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Ibad Ibrahim, a security expert and a regular panelist, and also Mohammed Shamsuddin Shadow. He is also here with us to discuss the issue. Gentlemen, welcome to the studios.
Thank you so much for having us.
Right. So let's begin. We're starting from Sierra Leone. And their country, they just had the national elections for presidential elections, and as at now, we are not sure of the total outcome. But what are your initial comments about the election process in Kenya, in Sierra Leone? Let me begin from you, Irbad.
Okay, thank you so much, Bubu, and thanks to you and the production team. You brought me together with an old-time friend and elderly brother, and Brother Shamsuddin. I think Sierra Leone has had quite a checkered history in the past 3 decades. All of us were gasping in suspense when there were talks of going into a ferocious election that would be contested by people with different political ideologies. But by and large, Bubu, we see vestiges of an election that has been fairly transparent, that has been fairly peaceful, and we are only marking time until the total declaration of the results. The ruling APC party prides itself on the boom in infrastructure, construction of roads, bridges, and all that. But the main opposition party says its performance was shambolic during the 2004 Ebola crisis. Certainly loads of Sierra Leoneans were seen as pariah people because they couldn't travel to other countries. And then in 2007, unfortunately, there was a mad slide that cost the lives of many people. And so fundamentally, when you put 2 and 2 together, in terms of infrastructure, we would say the ruling party would be heading for victory. But of course, there are other nuances that come with an election. And Sierra Leone is still in the process of post-conflict reconstruction. And there are so many things that need to be done in the areas of education, healthcare delivery, and a host of others. But I believe that even though it will be premature, 25%, a quarter of the total polls have already been enumerated. These are glaring signs that Sierra Leone is picking up the pieces from the ashes of war that plagued the country. So I would give it a clean bill of health. And it's also interesting that our former president, John Dramani Mahama, is the head of the observer mission over there. And just as we saw in other elections, like the Liberian election, and the international community gave it a clean bill of health. But one idiosyncratic feature of the elections in Sierra Leone is that, unlike Ghana, where you need 50% plus only 1 vote, you need over 55%. So technically,
we'll go into that.
So technically speaking, I agree entirely with the initial preamble you gave that we are heading for a runoff.
Right. So, Kafui, what do you have to say about as your initial remarks about the elections in Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much, Bubu, and a warm good evening to your cherished viewers out there. I think from a strict election perspective, I think Sierra Leone is doing quite well. This would be the 4th time Sierra Leoneans are going to the polls after the violent conflict that visited the country some decades ago. But most importantly, I think the conversation should be taken away from merely having elections. I mean, elections haven't been a panacea to either bringing about cohesion or, nation building. Elections having been the panacea of bringing about fruitful development or development that meets the aspiration of the citizenry. That notwithstanding, we can't also say that elections are not important if we have adopted a liberal Western style of democracy whose essential feature is having regular or periodic elections. And so in that regard, I will keep it brief and say that they've done well by going to the polls, by accepting that this is what they have given to themselves as a medium through which they change leaders or parties or ideologies or programs. I would also say that they've done well by conducting this in a very peaceful atmosphere to the best of their abilities and the resources. We all know that Sierra Leone is coming out of war. It hasn't got there yet. There are a lot of institutional and structural challenges, even though it has gone through 4 elections. But then it has done well by minimizing any form of violence or acrimony that might have been associated with the elections to the very barest minimum. And so I think that's a positive sign. But then, as I said earlier on, we would need to take the discussion from merely having elections to the more nuance of democracy that is germane to nation building and development.
So, Mohammed, what do you have to say?
Yeah, thank you, and it's a pleasure at least appearing on your program for the first time. And I've been a fan of GTV, especially in the debate, because I see the important role of in an independent media in democracy. And we all hope and pray and that GBC should assume that public service broadcaster, so that they continue to provide us with more of such program that brings development. Having said that,
that is why we also need to pay our TV license.
Of course. My colleagues have said, and I barely have nothing to say, but just to also emphasize that as a student of politics, I believe Africa is making progress. For instance, if you read some commentaries from Western-oriented scholars, they have they paint very bleak picture about Africa. That, Africa is not going anywhere. But we have seen signs. Sierra Leone, as they said, is a post-conflict country, which is really, and they are showing signs. And one thing that I'm happy with is cutting across all the distance is the fact that we are even adopting technology. Even though it's a blessing, it also serves as this. But gradually, people are getting there. And what I foresee is that at the end of the day, elections will become, it has even become, but as Kafui said, and which is very important, we should move beyond elections to look at real issues. Even though elections are important in ensuring accountability, it gives the citizenry the opportunity to hold their citizens to account. But beyond, we have to move from being electoral democracy to a real democracy where we matured, where people will get deliberated. This is, for me, what I see is very crucial, and this is why we should aspire to maybe ask whatever we should do, we should continue doing that, and also praise all the parties in the Sierra Leone election, that they understand that even though they are coming from, or maybe they have history of violence, they have still accepted that there is a means of settling their dispute. And this means is that, at least I heard one of the parties was even writing a statement challenging this process. It didn't go to the streets. But I believe it is a very encouraging sign for Africa, and there should something we should laugh about and pat ourselves in our backs.
I was checking the net this evening, and I was saying something like blockchain elections. I don't know if you also came about the result. What is that about, that Sierra Leone adopting blockchain something? I don't really know. I don't know if you have any idea what they're trying to talk about.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the spirit of an election is a common denominator to many people. But then when you look at the number of people that went into this election, and considering how this is razor thin, the election is too close to call, and of course because of a history of violence, it has become very difficult for people to adopt the ideals of a democracy. And so, yes, 4 elections that have been so far been successful, but the uncertainties, you know, the firmament of uncertainty that hangs overhead in Sierra Leone makes it a unique case. We've seen quite a number of regime changes within the West African sub-region in recent times. Yaya Jammeh of the Gambia is gone, a host of other, Yaya Boni of Benin, and a host of other people have given way to fresh, you know, sleeves. But I believe Sierra Leone comes with some baggage. Here in Bujumbura camp, we don't only have Liberians, there are Sierra Leoneans as well. So it has a ripple effect on the rest of the sub-region, and no matter how the trajectory, the direction to which the pendulum swings, I believe fundamentally the onus will lie upon other leaders within the sub-region to make sure that regardless of the outcome, Sierra Leoneans come out of this unscathed.
But you touch on the issue of the candidates getting 55%. I think Sierra Leone is only a country in Africa that is going to that level, because most countries I know it's 50% plus 1 vote. Why is Sierra Leone going to 55%?
I think for every country is unique. You know, maybe some historical antecedents, because the popularity of a leader has an overarching impact on the kind of street credibility you have, and the kind of relational productivity that will accompany that. And look at Ghana's elections in the past, you know, 16 years, for example. There are times you hear there has been a slight margin. You've won marginally by maybe 100,000. Dramani Mahama won in 2012, I think, by a margin of 300,000. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there was a yawning gap between the immediate second party, the NDC, and Nanado, when he won by close to 1 million votes. So I believe, yes, it makes Sierra Leone quite unique. But
even at that time, it didn't get to 55%, even with a margin of 1 million.
We would always have 50 point something percent.
But don't forget that in the Ghanaian case, there is no, how do you call it, the Parliament joint passes an LI instrument covering the elections. In that LI, all the LIs that have been passed by Parliament in the Fourth Republic does not say that you need 50 plus 1. It says you need more than 50% of vote cast. I mean, we have made it a street jargon that you need 50 plus 1, like it's more than 50% of vote cast. Now, the thing is that elections in most liberal societies are premised on simple majority rule. I mean, they are majoritarian democracies in essence, and so it's premised on simple majority rule, as in who is the first to have passed the post, the mark that has been set by. Don't forget that even in other societies where they have a form of parliamentary democracy, it is about the leading parties, parties that together can garner more than the other smaller parties. They then go into a form of coalition. For example, in Botswana, since their democratic history that began, they've always had a ruling coalition. It has never been a single party going into any government. And so I think that basically these clauses or these rules that govern election are premised on, one, the realities of the state, the particular state, and also the history from which it is coming from. If you have a situation like that of Botswana, which is more or less like a coalition of ruling elites, it's more difficult for you to set the rule and say that a party must have 50 plus 1% or more than 50% or 55%, because the way their politics has evolved does not allow or will not allow such a thing to happen. And also it is an internal peacemaking mechanism in which you set it in a way that at the end of the day, parties that go to the polls are happy with the results. And as I said, this is also done in uniqueness to the rich history of the country. In the case of Ghana, we have borrowed from previous republics. the first, second, and third republics, and even some of the experiences that led to military overthrows. And that has shaped what we do in the Fourth Republic by saying that going into an election, a candidate must seek to garner more than 50% of the valid votes that have been cast, so as to make sure that we know that clearly it is this particular party whose ideas were presented at the polls that we have given the mandate to rule. And if the parties, if a single party is unable to secure such a mandate, then we have to go back again and seek a clearer mandate. It is all to forestall the fact that somebody may go back later and say that yes, we've all gone to the polls, but I don't think that legitimately you were elected. Because in other societies, there are people, their parties can get 40%, another party will get 28%, one will get 39%, and the 40% has won.
Yeah.
You don't need to get 50%. But then looking at the history from which you are coming, especially with 11 years of military rule and coming into a democracy after 11 years of military rule, with the pent-up feelings that were in the society, it was only rational for the Constituent Assembly and the panel of experts to have said that, listen, let's go for somebody who has a clear mandate, somebody who has more than 50% of valid vote cast to lead us, so that we are clear in our minds that as a nation, this is the party with whom we have entrusted our fate for the next couple of years to rule and then to guide us.
Yeah, but I'm sure Mohammed will come in.
Yeah.
I think my colleague mentioned clarity of mandate and the issues of legitimacy. But surprisingly, even though India is the largest democracy in the world, the most buoyant and flourishing of all is the United States of America. And everybody knows Hillary Clinton garnered or elicited more votes than did Donald Trump. So therefore, yes, Sierra Leone is unique. It has quite a checkered history of violence, and therefore the more popular an elected leader is, the slimmer the chances of slipping or relapsing into war. So it's fair and square, and I believe it's a good,
Mohammed, but look at this situation whereby in an event that none of the candidate is able to get 55% of the valid vote cast, the two leading parties will go for a runoff.
Yes.
And in that case, whoever gets more than 50% get to be the elected president.
Yeah.
So what difference does it make?
No, you see, let's look at the advantages or maybe of or disadvantages of a simple majority. First passing the post. I mean, you are telling me that I can win with just a single vote to be elected as president.
Yeah, that is if you have 50%.
50%. Even in Ghana, it appears it's a majoritarian, but it is not a complicated one. We are not using proportional representation. We are just using, because even when it comes to parliamentary, that is where it is simple majority, where I can beat you with one vote. You remember the MP3 case in Tema? Where 3 votes are. But I see what they are saying, Sierra Leone is a unique case. My brother has given the historical, the checkered history. Look, issues of ethnicity. It's also an issue that they have the two main things, the Creoles and the indigenous, the conflict that exists in that country. Those are issues that are a challenge to them. And recently with this pockets of, there are even issues about those issues, and the issues about national unity is key to them. So if they look at all these things, they say, okay, why not let's get a leader who can garner at least 55% of the vote. What it means is that at least you have fair share of what your opponents voting, and it has to add to your legitimacy. As Erbat said, we shouldn't relapse, go back to war again. So we needed a system to ensure that we get a popular leader. However, you see, if you were looking at all this, look at all this in terms of like you are using Clinton, if you know American system. Some podcasts or maybe authorities have said that it's not easy. Election is not just a means of what, at least it's not a best system of attaining the common good for everybody, because somebody can go out of his way to buy the vote of everybody. We also in elections where people use what is now the subculture, moneycracy, where people are using money to buy elections. In the American elections, you see, they have a check on the popular one. That's why everybody will vote. But they have a special electoral college to check sometimes the deficiency or what, or maybe what do I call it? Maybe the loopholes in if there's something like that, loopholes in the general, because when you allow all the writers, popular votes of the people do not lead us to what attain common good. People can just go out and just vote anybody at all, but they need a system to check. That's why we are even in Ghana here, we need to even look at it critically. So the electoral college is there as maybe other stakeholders who understand their country's objective. That's what we want to do. Because if we allow everybody to just cast their vote, people will decide on any issue. But at the end of the day, elections must lead us to the goal of attaining the common good of everybody. So I believe the Sierra Leoneans felt that getting 55% is what will lead them to maybe attain that is in order. Okay. It's in order. Well, regardless of whether we go to third, fourth round, no matter around that we vote, is better than taking violence.
Okay, you see, Bubu, just a quick one. You see, the construct of African states is such that if you are adopting liberal democratic practices, you are basically asking political parties to mobilize. And elections are about mobilizing. It's about getting majority of the people on your side. And the way parties mobilize in the African state is that they have to do ethnic mobilization. Whereas that's how come in most African states, the permutations are done. Okay, if we have this candidate coming from this region, we must get another candidate coming from region X, so as we will be able to garner enough votes from both regions, and then also make sure that in other regions we are able to make a fair representation to be able to get the minimum requirements to win the election. Now, if you have a state that has been ravaged by war, a state that has pockets of ethnic division, and with the history of war still lingering around, and the quest to build a nation that is united around a common good, you would need to put in a mechanism that will ensure that any party that is seeking to lead at any point in time has considerable majority among all ethnic groups that constitute the state. And that, I think, is what is happening. I mean, that is the scenario in most African states. And I think the Sierra Leone case is not very different. Putting 55% is just to make sure that any party that is coming into the election make sure that it is mobilizing from all ethnic groups, and it is making sure that it is able to garner more than 50% of valid vote cast from all those ethnic groups. And once that happens, they, in their own framework of doing things, think that will help the nation building agenda. That will bring everybody around the table to say that this is what we want to do and this is how we are carrying it along. So I think it is fair. The second round, I mean, it doesn't change anything to say that in the second round, let's have 50%, because now it is two main parties. So if you divide the country into two, you are getting, I mean, more than 50 of the country voting for one person, which is fair. But in a case where you have 5, 6, 7, 8 political parties, it won't be fair to say that
16 candidates.
16, and in this case, 16 candidates. It won't be fair to say that you are looking for somebody who just have 50 plus 1 or a simple majority. The legitimacy of that particular party and its candidate would always be a problem throughout the tenor, because other contesting parties, other ethnic groups, and don't forget, there are parties that mobilize around ethnic groups or that are formed, that are rooted in ethnic groups. So if you don't get more than that, all these parties will challenge your legitimacy. And the last thing I think any president will want to be thinking about is his or her legitimacy going into governance. That is what any party or president would want to avoid. And I think it is only fair that that system is put in place.
Right. So maybe we'll quickly move to Kenya, but before we go there, you know, the elections were held on the 7th, and today is Saturday, 10th we've not gotten the final result yet, and the result is so far about 30% of the results, and then the ruling party candidate getting about 44%, the main opposition candidate about 41%. So they are running neck and neck. So what do you think are the issues that have driven these Kenyan elections?
I think, well, I'll cherry pick a few comments that have been made by my colleagues. You see, in Africa, we talk about equity. We talk about all human beings being created equal in the sight of God. But, Bubu, we are not equal. You understand? So therefore, look, in Sierra Leone...
Is it the issue of the animal farm?
Yeah, the electoral college. Because at some point, you see, the use of mass communication tools to sway the general masses. And people come with manifesto promises that are not realistic, but still they campaign on that and win. And at the end of the day, countries in Africa suffer. So yes, human beings are equal, but we keep saying these fingers are not of the same height. So therefore, or length. Fundamentally, I think there should come a time when a voter like me and a voter like you or the colleagues on this site, my vote should not be equal to the vote of someone who controls the factors of production. For example, someone has a business, he employs 1,000 people, and his vote is of the same magnitude or value as the gate man's vote or the security man over there.
I think that primarily I disagree with Ibrad on this. I mean, we are coming into a state based on a social pact, and basically what we are saying is that
we elect the wrong party.
You see, liberal democracies and elections in themselves.
I talked about the electoral college.
No, but elections in themselves do not guarantee that a sane person will be elected as a leader. I mean, there is nowhere where election has been a guarantee that a party or a sane person is going to ascend the throne as the leader. What election is basically saying is that we as a people have exchanged part of our right with the state in a social pact, and we have asked the state to protect us. But then inbuilt in that mechanism, the state also gives us some room to be able to decide at any point in time whom we want to lead us in guaranteeing our rights, in guaranteeing our freedoms, in guaranteeing our safety as a people. Now, if you are telling me that somebody controls the factors of production and one doesn't control, so the person who controls the factors of production should have more say than you. What you are trying to say is that
he understands GDP and inflation better than the
inflation. I can tell you for a fact that the person who sells oranges on the streets, the person who hawks dog chain in traffic, perhaps understands GDP better than the person who controls the factors of production. You know why? GDP in itself is not an accurate measure of development. GDP in itself does not accurately tell you the satisfaction of the ordinary person. Now, we are in this country and there were times when we were saying that inflation was about 10%, single-digit inflation. But then you go to the market and the actual amount of money you need to cough out to be able to purchase a good has increased dramatically. Yet, principles, economic principles that perhaps may not speak to the reality are telling you that, oh, your GDP is single digit. No, the person who controls the factors of production, who obviously is making mass profit out of this, is satisfied with it. Now, when you bring in such a system, what you are trying to say is that, listen, let's continue to impoverish the poor and make the rich richer. But what is going on?
Everybody agrees that the electoral system we have adopted in Africa is not perfect. And therefore we are...
Is it just in Africa?
Neither is there a perfect electoral system globally. There is nowhere in this world where there is a perfect electoral system.
I don't want to domesticate some of the examples. Frankly, the issue is that the campaign promises on which some parties from 92 have been able to drum up support from people, whether on ethnic lines or geographical lines, or hacking on the poverty of people and their ignorance. Some of those things have only taken us back decades. So we want a society that doesn't just go to the polls and queue to vote. We want people to vote based upon the fact that they understand the issues.
No, so let me have my
you have
in regard to your question that looking at how closer. The issue is that you remember that they look at the dynamics. Ernest Bai Koroma has served as what 2 terms in office. Obviously, compared to Ghana, 2016, is it 2016?
Yeah, 2016.
208, 2000. Obviously, the stakes are very high because everybody feels there's a chance, and also there are cracks within the APC, which led to maybe some of the others. But having said that, I tend to understand where my brother is coming from. But unfortunately, we have maybe married liberal democracy, and that has been the only game in town. That has been everything that we talked about is liberal democracy. The constitution we adopted goes along the lines of what. But you see, the point is that if you allow the aristocrats or the elites to determine our fate, of course they have their interest. Then their interest will be more than ours. Or they will look at how they set their interest. It's like
that will be forming an elitist society.
It's like let me give you it's like
even with your interest.
I'm giving the
we don't have enough
it's
time.
a genuine point I'm raising.
because
with all the interest, look, someone is in Pongborgo Yoyo. The person can call into a radio program and say freedom of expression. This is the benefit of democracy. But see how the gap between the rich and the poor continues to grow in Ghana, for example. So it's not about people having fair representation. It's about electing the right people with the right ideas.
I'm not saying if you are like an ordinary person, let's say ordinary in quotes, you maybe ordinary as we say a street hawker. You find a brilliant student, your child becomes a brilliant student, he gets admission at Achimota, or maybe some of the elite schools in Accra, where all those PTA, former judges, those upper middle class society. Can this woman even going to stake a right in that environment to say that no, this is what I want for my day? It will be, nobody appears to you will not be seen. You see, this is the concept of this democracy is people-centered. We move away from elitists to now mass people. So it is the common people's rule. But the point is that as Plato and the rest will say that democracy itself will not lead you to the good. But then we should find ways and means of what. That is why the likes of media, the civil society are there to guide the individual to make those right choices.
Yeah, Mohammed, quickly we have to move to Kenya because we.
Ruling party.
It's too close to call.
It's too close. The people of Sierra Leone know best.
All right,
I feel the ruling party.
So let's move to Kenya, and then you know that after months of campaigning and sporadic clashes between the government and opposition supporters, which affected the growth in Kenya, in January, Odinga took a symbolic presidential oath at the Uhuru Park in the capital, Nairobi. And then a direct challenge to Kenyatta's authority. Now the two leaders are trying to come together for the unity of the country. What do you make of the latest gesture from the two leaders?
You know, I have operations in East Africa, and Kenya is one of my operations bases. When this brouhaha started, I felt Raila Odinga was biting more than he could chew. But I'm happy Rex Tillerson, the U.S. Secretary of State, was in town around the time they were announcing this. I think only yesterday, Friday. But I think I read somewhere that he's been taken ill, so he's truncating his engagement in Kenya to go back to D.C. Yes, it's a step in the right direction. But I feel for other people who were in the trenches with NASA and Raila Odinga. You know Muguna. Muguna is a very vociferous critique. I think in the past he ran for the mayor of Nairobi. Very, very vocal and vociferous. He had a dual citizenship. I think they've recanted his Kenyan citizenship, and he traveled on a Canadian passport now. He's been repatriated to Canada. So those were the hanging fruits, and I believe they've been sacrificed. Raila Odinga decided that he was going to become the people's president. I don't know what he thought that would mean, but it's good that, yes, the two key leaders, having seen the bloodshed their disagreement has cost the people of Kenya, would want to see eye to eye now. But this deal is quite scanty on details. We don't know, is it a power sharing agreement, or the power to control certain departments or ministries or sectors would be in the hands of the NASA party. So they need to add some flesh to the skeleton. But by and large, for as long as the street protests are going to end, for as long as the partisan polarization, that almost made Kenya teeter on the precipice of potential civil war. For as long as all of those will dissipate, this is welcome piece of news for Africa. And I believe in the past 5 years, we've seen enough, maturity in terms of political transitions, in terms of compromises and conciliations that were made by various political parties. So I would give Raila Odinga a tap on the back for coming around, assuming an intransigent, entrenched position after having been given the opportunity by the Supreme Court to run again, and withdrawing would not have helped matters. But there are ethnic issues in Kenya. Government jobs to a large extent go to the tribesmen of Uhuru Kenyatta. So if they're able to strike a deal for every government institution or agency or department, is going to be 70-30 or 60-40, so that the ordinary folks that feel disenchanted will feel that there is fair representation. It's a welcome piece of news, but I would dare say that let's welcome this with cautious optimism, because it's so scanty on detail, even though there is so much fanfare about the announcement.
Yeah, Kafui, you saw how Raila Odinga conducted himself before and after the presidential elections. What do you think will have caused him to change his mind all of a sudden, coming into having a pact with the current president, then wanting to work together with the president?
I think Raila, as a very old politician, did know that he couldn't continue on that path for long. I mean, Kenya is a state that, if you look at the way politics is conducted in Kenya, you would realize that no matter how you think that you can overdo the state, it will be difficult for you. And I think Odinga's problem was actually trying to moderate the forces within his own party. The Doves and the Hawks, I think the Hawks were at a point in control of affairs, and that was what affected him. But as a seasoned politician, I think he knew, when he retires to bed, in his own quiet time, he knows that, listen, I can't continue on this path for long. Why? Because the authority over the use of violent force behoves on the sitting president. He exercises that authority. And more so, opposition parties have equal responsibility to be responsible to the state. I mean, the Constitution in itself gives them that right to be responsible citizens. I mean, you can't go ahead and be fomenting trouble and be behaving irresponsibly in the name of elections, in the name of the presidency, in the name of you feeling that you've been cheated at the polls. It is, to me, I can't say I'm patting him on the back for what he has done. I think this is what he should have done from day one, because if you look at the elections that were run, there were gubernatorial elections, there were council elections, and his party won some of the gubernatorial elections. His party won senatorial elections. His party won seats in the National Assembly. And governance of every liberal society is not only by the orders of the president. It is by all institutions of state that have been fashioned to play independent or collective role in securing the integrity of the state. And so you have your MPs in parliament who have the responsibility of the mandate they carry to ensure that Uhuru's programs and actions reflect the collectivity of the Kenyan state. Why can't you fight your ideas within that space? It mustn't always be about individuals. It must be about the collective. And I was telling people that, listen, Raila can't go far. Because it will just get to a point, if he's making the country ungovernable, it only behooves on the sitting president to say that, listen, this can't continue any longer. And then just release a few armed policemen or soldiers on him. And that would have ended it. You recall when he was going to the late Morgan Changai's funeral, for example, only one aide was allowed to travel with him. And so for how long will you continue with that? There is nowhere where a people's president has been able to dominate, except perhaps for Madagascar, when somewhere in 2000, Mark Ravalomanana rode on the popularity of the people to overthrow Andra Rajolina, who was then the sitting president. And so you cannot do that. And in that case, I mean, in Madagascar too, the situation was different. The context was different. Yes. So I think that it is good news. Yeah. It is good news for Kenya that he has pledged. I think that the street demonstrations, the protests would end. Yeah. I think that they will channel their energies into reorganizing and see how best they can fight the next election, because the next election the stakes will be much higher. Uhuru will not be on the scene. He would have done his term and will be exiting. Now this is the time for them to say that, okay, 10 years of Uhuru hasn't really brought the change we require as a people, and then we think that we as a coalition have the right set of policies to champion the development of Kenyans. And if Kenyans buy into that, why not? So I think that any responsible politician should, by this time, be reviewing what happened at the previous election and be putting in place mechanisms to fight the next elections.
Yeah, but Mohammed, you know, Raila installed himself some time ago as the people's president. Some of the opposition candidates were there. And I believe after that, some of them were arrested for treason and I think 3 of them and the rest. But now the main man has turned back to come and form an alliance with the president. What does it mean for Kenya?
No, as my colleagues here said, the guy is a seasoned politician. If you read all over the world, even in Ghana, I'm sure President Akufo-Addo might want some sympathy votes. Like, you know, there were times that he suffered. He has dedicated himself for the job. He has proven that when you handle a mandate, that's, I believe, the kind of advice or counsel that Raila Odinga was taking. But you know, Uhuru means independence. And I'm happy that at least we've gotten to this place. Because at least I was so surprised, especially when he decided to swore himself as what? As the people's president. Well, it was quite serious. Some of us felt it would have just been picked up and there will be a violence. But it's also very matured on the part.
That program was highly attended.
Yeah, very much. No, but of course, when leaders in Africa, when they want to deal with you, regardless of the consequence, they find ways and means of dealing with you. But at least either way now, what is important is that we shouldn't go back too much. What do we do by way of what? Consolidating the small gain and maybe see how Kenya can transform itself to become a model for the rest of the world. That, for me, that is so crucial, and I wish to congratulate all the parties for their sign of maturity, and we pray that at least they should continue, and then when the people feel that they are no longer tired with the Uhuru and his government, they should vote them out for the others also to come in.
Yeah, Ibad, is this a strategic decision by Raila, looking at the fact that in the next election Uhuru will not be there and he has a better chance, so he wants to probably pave the way for himself to get there?
I think it's quite difficult to gauge some of the background musings that would have led to this capitulation, so to speak, on the part of Raila Odinga. But there is no doubt whatsoever that the Americans might have played an important role in this, because as Odinga was throwing his weight about, accusing the IEBC, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, for not doing enough in terms of reforms going into the second election, He had all the big platforms. He was still traveling to Western capitals. So I believe he's been given good counsel and that he should de-escalate so that this political imbroglio or impasse will come to an end. I believe it's a feather in everybody's cap. But deals like this are scanty on detail, because certainly at the end of the day it's par people are ferreting for. So maybe there must have been a gentleman's agreement behind the scenes that maybe this cannot be called a power sharing agreement, but control this sector, nominate ministers for this area and all that. So it's a step in the right direction. But what I have seen based upon my work on the ground in Kenya is that there is a lot of ethnic marginalization in the country. And if Uhuru Kenyatta and his government do not do enough to resolve that, we'll be moving around in circles, and Kenya will relapse into the post-election conflict we saw in 2007 and 8.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Raila Odinga is, I think, 72 or 73 years old now. In the next 5 years, he will be 77 at least. I don't see how he would be a strong candidate for the next election. I'm not a
but we see President candidate 80 years above.
Yes, but then also we spoke against that his candidature. I mean, Mugabe, when he was going for his
not even Mugabe, I think in Burkina Faso, is it Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone, no, Senegal. The
Abdullah
was
90 something.
The point is that
Mugabe is a sexer.
Mnangagwa
is equally older.
But you see, the thing is that we have been chanting against aged people leading our countries, and I think Kenya is one of the countries where there's a strong activism against having very old people leading them. Let's not forget that in 2007,
look at our own election in Ghana about Nana and John Mahama. The argument was that Nana was 70 years above John, but he still went ahead to win the election.
The point I'm trying to say is that in 5 years' time, Raila Odinga will be almost 80 years old. Will be almost 80 years old. That's almost 80 years old. I mean, you are three years shy of 80 years old. I mean, you are still old. The point I'm trying to make here is that Raila has been at the helm of affairs before. Let's not forget that in the power sharing deal in 2002 or 2000, after Mwai Kibaki left, during Mwai Kibaki's time, he was the prime minister. With Mwai Kibaki, and they shared that power. Now, this is not a form of power sharing because, one, it is not as if Odinga contested even the second round of the elections. And it is not as if Odinga's call was that he won and he was cheated. Because in the second round, he didn't contest and cannot say he won and was cheated, even though he has raised issues of irregularities. It is not the calling of any particular candidate to determine whether an electoral reform is comprehensive or not. Because if that is the case, then I'm not sure that any candidate going into an election will be happy about the procedures being put in place. So that is the issue. Now, I also think that, yes, we don't know the details of this. Kenya is a very strategic partner to the United States, especially in the East African region, and I'm sure in the interest of the United States, they will want to see peace. I mean, very less conflict in that region, so as to further their interest. I'm not too sure whether individually Raila is going to benefit from this deal, but what I am thinking is that if he is a very calculative president, he's a very calculative leader, which I expect him to be, and strategic, what he would be doing in this case is that he would be preparing the grounds for his successor rather, because I think African parties do not. It is the case in their neighboring Uganda, for example, when his opposition has been fighting for close to 30 years. So I know the issue. If you talk to the youth in Rwanda, they are tired of Museveni.
Uganda,
yes, Uganda. They are tired of Museveni. They want Museveni to go. But you see, they are not having the right alternative also in Besigye. And so the issue is that, to me, if Raila would be strategic enough, Raila would be using this as a platform.
Are you sure any African leader that he would struggle up to this?
Let's look at it in this case. Okay, so Raila decides that he will go. Don't forget that the party Raila is leading is a coalition of other parties. And all the parties that came together had leaders. Had forerunners, and so it can't be just about one person.
But as we speak now, he's the main candidate
now. But what I'm saying is that
situation. This is very ideal.
I know it is quite ideal. But what I'm also trying to tell you is that in the next 5 years, some of the leaders of the smaller parties would also have gained significant control. Don't forget, Raila is not the only leading politician in Kenya. Even within the NASA. They are equally strong candidates. But the only issue was that people felt that Raila wasn't fairly treated post Moi Kibaki, post the power sharing, and that they felt that he lost the election to Raila to Uhuru Kenyatta, which led to the post 2007 Kenyan violence. So it was just a means of appeasing him, feeling that this time round he was going to win it, so that it will appease the loss that he suffered. But going into the elections again, and you see, Kenya is not like Ghana, unfortunately. In Ghana, we can have the way our party system is structured, and the way the kind of factions we have within our political parties can enable one person to be given the chance 2, 3, 4 times to contest a particular time. But it is not the case in Kenya. And so I think that, to me, it is a two-way situation. One, it is good for the state because it allows the president to have some clear focus in doing what he's doing. Indeed, electoral politics, the ethnicization of politics and state goods in Kenya didn't start from now. It started right from Uhuru's father, and it has gone through. Even Raila's father contested Uhuru's father and all those things. It has gone through. It wouldn't take Raila, it wouldn't take Uhuru to solve it. But I know that if this peace deal is clinched in a manner that would allow for all of them to come to the table and say that both at the national, sub-national and local levels, we will collaborate to work. It would not only go to the benefit of the citizenry of Kenya, but it will also go to the benefit of both parties.
And that is what you are saying. I tend to maybe to agree with you to a large extent, but what I want you to also understand is that inwardly, outwardly, all of us have one intention. All of us, our intention is good, or we all want the country's progress. But inwardly, people have different agenda.
Sure. That's what I'm not sure about the private benefits.
So that's why I'm saying that for now, let's rule out the fact that age as a factor. Let's deal with him as a political actor. Because anything is possible. Anything is possible. And but all of it is a happy news. We need to maybe pray over it and then maybe thank God, because we are religious, so we should thank God for such a feat, at least for the benefit of a larger African society. Because there are so many things that are going wrong in Africa, which you can't talk. There are so many things. Maybe yes.
That is true. Because personally, I don't think any African leader at that opposition that will say he got to the point that he's too old to relinquish power to another candidate to take it up, because he will say that he has marketed himself to a point that it is now obvious that he will win the election. And I'm not sure there is any obvious candidate who is succeeding. Just like the case of Zimbabwe. The guy who recently died, Changarai, now they're struggling to find somebody to replace him.
I think Kafui is making a strong case for African leaders to have the appetite to want to groom successors.
Probably he's influenced by Mo Ibrahim's comment. He was saying that why Africans are allowing old men to rule them.
Sometimes you don't need to be called Your Excellency, but when you get your protege to occupy the position of president, you still call the shots. The Angolan example is quite a glaring one for us.
Don't forget about the Zambia issue.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and then we have to end the conversation here. It's getting interesting, but unfortunately, time is not our friend. And then, viewers, and this is why we end today's program, World View. I've been in the studio with Kafui Chakpo. He's from the Ghana Center for Democracy. Is that the thing? Center for Social Democracy. And then also we have Ilbad Ibrahim, security analyst and CEO of Ilbad's Security Consult. Yes, and also Mohammed Shamsuddin.
Yeah, I represent Forum for Ghana Solidarity for Western Sahara. The Sahrawi people.
Yeah. This
is a case of a problem of decolonization. Those guys have been refugees in their country for almost over 40 years. It's a forgotten history. Nobody is talking about them. They are living their destiny. Morocco is always trampling on their rights. As it appears, nobody is talking about. Nkrumah said,
I think we have to schedule a time so that we'll talk about
because
I know Kusipran and the rest are also very much interested in that fight. So maybe we'll find time and then we'll talk about that part.
So it should be now because there are interesting developments that are going on. And then
right. So viewers, this is why we end the program. My name is Bubu Nenogo. The program has been produced by Celestine Avi. We say thank you to our technical people, our technicians, and all the camera people who help us to bring you this program. Until we meet again next week, the same time, this is World View. Have a good night.
Okay, thanks.